Chapter 1, Electric Charges and Fields. Introduction. All of us have the experience of seeing a spark or hearing a crackle when we take off our synthetic clothes or sweater, particularly in dry weather. This is almost inevitable with ladies' garments like a polyester sari. Have you ever tried to find any explanation for this phenomena? Another common example of electric discharge is the lightning that we see in the sky during thunderstorms. We also experience a sensation of an electric shock either while opening the door of a car or holding the iron bar of a bus or after sliding from our seat. The reason for these experiences is discharge of electric charges through our body, which were accumulated due to rubbing of insulating surfaces. You might have also heard that this is due to generation of static electricity. This is precisely the topic that we are going to discuss in this and the next chapter. Static means anything that does not move or change with time. Electrostatics deals with the study of forces, fields, and potentials arising from static charges. Electric charge. Historically, the credit of discovery of the fact that amber rubbed with wool or silk cloth attracts light objects goes to Thales of Miletus, Greece, around 600 BC. The name electricity is coined from the Greek word electron, meaning amber. Many such pairs of materials were known which, on rubbing, could attract the light object like straw, with balls, and bit of papers. You can perform the following activity at home to experience such an effect. Cut out long strips of white paper and lightly iron them. Take them near a TV screen or computer monitor. You will see the strips get attracted to the screen. In fact, they remain stuck to the screen for a while. It was observed that if two glass rods rubbed with wool or silk cloth are brought close to each other, they repel each other. The two strands of wool or two pieces of silk cloth with which the rods were rubbed also repel each other. However, the glass rod and wool attracted each other. Similarly, two plastic rods rubbed with cat's fur repelled each other but attracted the fur. On the other hand, the plastic rod attracts the glass rod and repels the silk or wool with which the glass rod is rubbed. The glass rod repels the fur. If a plastic rod rubbed with fur is made to touch two small pith balls, nowadays we can use polystyrene balls suspended by silk or nylon thread, then the balls repel each other and then are also repelled by the rod. A similar effect is found if the pith balls are touched with a glass rod rubbed with silk. A dramatic observation is that pith ball touched with glass rod attracts another pith ball touched with plastic rod. These seemingly simple facts were established from years of efforts and careful experiments and their analysis. It was concluded after many careful studies by different scientists that there were only two kinds of entity, which is called the electric charge. They say that the bodies like glass or plastic rods, silk, fur, and pith balls are electrified. They acquire an electric charge on rubbing. The experiments on pith balls suggested that there are two kinds of electrification, and we find that like charges repel and unlike charges attract each other. The experiments also demonstrated that the charges are transferred from the rods to the pith balls on contact. It is said that the pith balls are electrified or are charged by contact. The property which differentiates the two kinds of charges is called the polarity of charge. When a glass rod is rubbed with silk, the rod acquires one kind of charge and the silk acquires the second kind of charge. This is true for any pair of objects that are rubbed to be electrified. Now, if the electrified glass rod is brought in contact with silk with which it was rubbed, they no longer attract each other. They also do not attract or repel each other's light objects as they did not being electrified. Thus, the charges acquired after rubbing are lost when the charged bodies are brought in contact. What can you conclude from these observations? It just tells that unlike charges acquired by the objects, neutralize or nullify each other's effect. Therefore, the charges were named as positive and negative by the American scientist Benjamin Franklin. We know that when we add a positive number to a negative number of the same magnitude, the sum is zero. This might have been the philosophy in naming the charges as positive and negative. By convention, the charge on glass rod or cat's fur is called positive, and that on plastic rod or silk stump is negative. If an object possesses an electric charge, it is said to be electrified or charged. When it has no charge, it is said to be electrically neutral. Unification of electricity and magnetism. In olden days, electricity and magnetism were treated as separate subjects. Electricity dealt with charges on glass rods, cat's furs, batteries, lightning, etc., while magnetism described interaction of magnets, iron fillings, compass needles, etc. In 1820, Danish scientist Oersted found that a compass needle is deflected by passing an electric current through a wire placed near the needle. Ampere and Faraday supported this observation by saying that electric charges in motion produce magnetic fields, and moving magnets generate electricity. The unification of was achieved when the Scottish physicist Maxwell and the Dutch physicist Lorentz forwarded a theory where they showed the interdependence of these two subjects. This field is called electromagnetism. Most of the phenomena occurring around us can be described under electromagnetism. Virtually every force that we think of, like friction, chemical force between atoms, holding of matter together, and even the forces describing processes occurring in cells of living organisms, have its origin in electromagnetic force. Electromagnetic force is one of the fundamental forces of nature. Maxwell put forth four equations that play the same role in classical electromagnetism as Newton's equation of motion and gravitational law play in mechanics. He also argued that light is electromagnetic in nature and its speed can be found by making purely electric and magnetic measurements. He claimed that the science of optics is intimately related to that of electricity and magnetism. The science of electricity and magnetism is the foundation for the modern technological civilization. Electric power, telecommunication, radio and television, and a wide variety of practical applications used in daily life are based on the principles of this science. Although charged particles in motion exert both electric and magnetic forces in the frame of reference where all the charges are at rest, the forces are purely electrical. You know that gravitational force is a long range force. Its effect is felt even when the distance between the interacting particles is very large because the force decreases inversely of the square of the distance between the interacting bodies. We learned in this chapter that the electric force is a pervasive and in fact stronger than the gravitational force by several orders of magnitude. A simple apparatus to detect a charge on a body is the gold leaf electroscope. It consists of vertical metal rod housed in a box of two tin called fleece attached to its bottom end. When a charge object touches the metal knob at the top of the rod, charge flows on the leaves and they diverge. The degree of divergence is an indicator of amount of charge. Students can make a simple electroscope as follows. Take a thin aluminum curtain rod with ball ends fitted for hanging the curtain. Cut out a piece of length about 20 cm with the ball at one end and flatten the cut end. Take a large bottle that can hold this rod and a cork which will fit in the opening of the bottle. Make a hole in the cork sufficient to hold the curtain rod snugly. Slide the rod through the hole in the cork with the cut end on the lower side and the ball end projecting above the cork. Hold a small thin aluminium foil about 6 cm in length in the middle and attach it to a flattened end of the rod by cellulose tape. This forms the leaves of your electroscope. Fit the cork in the bottle with about 5 cm of the ball and projecting above the cork. A paper scale may be put inside the bottle in advance to measure the separation of leaves. The separation is a rough measure of the amount of charge on the electroscope. To understand how the electroscope works, use the white paper strips we used for seeing the attraction of charged bodies. Fold the strips into half so that you can make a mark of fold. Open the strip and iron it lightly with the mountain fold up as shown. Hold the strip by pinching it at the fold. You would notice that two halves moves apart. This shows that the strip has acquired charge on ironing. When you fold it into half, both the halves have the same charge. Hence they repel each other. The same effect is seen in the leaf electroscope. On charging the curtain rod by touching the ball end with an electrified body, charge is transferred to the curtain rod and the attached aluminum foil. Both the halves of the foil get similar charge and therefore repel each other. The divergence in the leaves depends on the amount of charge on them. Let us first try to understand why material bodies acquire charge. You know that all matter is made up of atoms and or molecules. Although normally the materials are electrically neutral, they do contain charges, but their charges are exactly balanced. Forces that hold the molecules together, forces that hold atoms together in a solid. The adhesive force of glue, forces associated with surface tension, all are basically electrical in nature, arising from the viscous sources between charged particles. Thus, the electric force is pervasive and it encompasses almost each and every field associated with our life. It is therefore essential that we learn more about such a force. To electrify a neutral body, we need to add or remove one kind of charge. When we say that body is charged, we always refer to this excess charge or deficit of charge. In solids, some of the electrons being less tightly bonded in the atom are the charges which are transferred from one body to the another. A body can thus be charged positively by losing some of its electrons. Similarly, a body can be charged negatively by gaining electrons. When we rub a glass rod with silk, some of the electrons from the rod are transferred to the silk cloth. Thus, the rod gets positively charged and silk gets negatively charged. No new charge is created in the process of rubbing, although the number of electrons that are transferred is a very small fraction of the total number of electrons in the material body. Also, one of the less tightly bound electrons in a material body can be transferred from it to another by rubbing. Therefore, when a body is rubbed with another, the body gets charged, and that is why we have to stick to certain pairs of materials to notice charging on rubbing the bodies. Conductors and insulators. A metal rod held in the hand and rubbed with wool will not show any sign of being charged. However, if a metal rod with a wooden or plastic handle is rubbed without touching its metal part, it shows sign of charging. Suppose we connect one end of a copper wire to a neutral pith ball and the other with a negatively charged plastic rod, we will find that the pith ball acquires a negative charge. If a similar experiment is repeated with a nylon thread or a rubber band, no transfer of charge will take place from the plastic rod to the pith ball. Why does the transfer of charge not take place from the rod to the ball? Some substances readily allow passage of electricity through them, others do not. Those which allow electricity to pass through them easily are called conductors. They have electric charges that are comparatively free to move inside the material. Metals, human and animal bodies and earth are conductors. Most of the non-metal like glass, porcelain, plastic, nylon, wood offer high resistance to the passage of electricity through them. They are called insulators. Most substances fall into one of the two classes stated above. When some charge is transferred to a conductor, it readily gets distributed over the entire surface of the conductor. In contrast, if the charge is put on an insulator, it stays at the same place. You will learn why this happens in the next chapter. This property of materials tells us why a nylon or plastic comb gets electrified on combing dry hair or on rubbing, but a metal article like spoon does not. The charges on metal leak through our body to the ground as both are conductors of electricity. When we bring a charged body in contact with the earth, all the excess charge on the body disappears by causing a momentary current to pass through the ground through the connecting conductor such as our body. This process of sharing the charges with the earth is called grounding or earthing. Earthing provides a safety measure for electrical circuits and appliances. A thick metal plate is buried deep into the earth and thick wires are drawn from this plate. These are used in buildings for the purpose of earthing near the main supply. The electric wiring in our houses has three wires: live, neutral, and earth. The first two carry electric current from the power station, and the third is earth by connecting it to the buried metal plate. Metallic bodies of the electric appliances such as electric iron, refrigerator, TV are connected to the earth wire. When any fault occurs or live wire touches the metallic body, the charge flows to the earth without damaging the appliances and without causing any injury to the humans. This would have otherwise been unavoidable since the human body is a conductor of electricity. Charging by induction. When we touch a pith ball with an electrified plastic rod, some of the negative charges on the rod are transferred to the pith ball and it also gets charged. Thus, the pith ball is charged by contact. It is then repelled by the plastic rod but is attracted by a glass rod which is oppositely charged. However, why an electrified rod attracts light objects is a question we still have left unanswered. Let us try to understand what could be happening by performing the following experiment. Bring two metal spheres A and B supported on insulating stands in contact. Bring positively charged rod near one of the spheres, taking care that it does not touch the sphere. The free electrons in the spheres are attracted towards the rod. This leaves an axis of positive charge on the rear surface of the sphere B. Both kinds of charges are bound in the metal spheres and cannot escape. They therefore reside on the surfaces. The left surface of sphere A has an excess of electric charge, negative charge, and the right surface of sphere B has an excess of positive charge. However, not all the electrons in the spheres have accumulated on the left surface of A. As the negative charge starts building up the left surface of A, other electrons are repelled by these. In a short time, equilibrium is reached under the action of force of attraction of the rod and force of repulsion due to accumulated charges. The equilibrium situation is shown in figure. The process is called induction of charge and happens almost instantaneously. The accumulated charges remain on the surface as shown till the glass rod is held near the sphere. If the rod is moved, the charges are not acted by any outside force and then distribute to their original neutral state. Separate the spheres by a small distance. While the glass rod is still near the sphere A, the two spheres are found to be oppositely charged and attract each other. Remove the rod. The charges on spheres rearrange themselves. Now separate the spheres quite apart. The charges on them get uniformly distributed over them. In this process, the metal spheres will get equally and oppositely charged. This is called charging by induction. The positively charged glass rod does not lose any of its charge, contrary to the process of charging by contact. When electrified rods are brought near light objects, a similar effect takes place. The rods induce opposite charges on the near surfaces of the objects and similar charges move to the farther side of the object. This happens even when the light object is not a conductor. The mechanism for how this happens is explained in later. And the centers of two types of charges are slightly separated. We know that opposite charges attract while similar charges repel. However, the magnitude of force depends on the distance between the charges, and in this case, the force of attraction overweighs the force of repulsion. As a result of particles like bits of paper or pith balls being light are pulled towards the rods. We'll not be reading the examples. Basic properties of electric charge. We have seen that there are two types of charges, namely positive and negative, and their effects tend to cancel each other. Here we shall now describe some other properties of electric charge. If the size of charged bodies are very small as compared to the distances between them, we treat them as point charges. All the charge content of the body is assumed to be concentrated at one point in space. Additivity of charges. We have not yet given a quantitative definition of a charge. We shall follow it up in next section. We shall tentatively assume that this can be done and proceed. If a system contains 2-point charges Q1 and Q2 and total charge of the system is obtained simply by adding algebraically Q1 and Q2, that is, charges add up like real numbers, or they are scalars like the mass of a body. If a system contains n charges Q1 to Qn, then the total charges of the system is Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3 and so on till Qn. Charge has magnitude but no direction, similar to mass. However, there is one difference between mass and charge. Mass of a body is always positive, where a charge can either be positive or negative. Proper signs have to be used while adding the charges in a system. For example, the total charge of a system containing 5 charges plus 1 plus 2 minus 3 plus 4 and minus 5 in some arbitrary unit is minus 1. In the same unit, charge is conserved. We have already hinted to the fact that when bodies are rubbed and charged by rubbing, there is transfer of electrons from one body to the another. No new charges are either created or destroyed. A picture of particles of electric charge enables us to understand the idea of conservation of charge. When we rub two bodies, what one body gains in charge, the other body loses. Within an isolated system consisting of many charged bodies due to interaction among the bodies, charges may get redistributed, but it is found that the total charge of the isolated system is always conserved. Conservation of charge has been always established experimentally. It is not possible to create or destroy net charge carried by any isolated system, although the charge carrying particles may be created or destroyed in a process. Sometimes nature creates charged particles. A neutron turns into proton and electron. The proton and electron thus created have equal and opposite charges, and the total charge is 0 before and after the creation. Quantization of charge. Experimentally, it is established that all free charges are integral multiples of a basic unit of charge denoted by E. Thus, charge Q on a body is always given by Q equals to NE, where n is any integer positive or negative. This basic unit of charge is the charge that an electron or proton carries. By convention, the charge on an electron is taken to be negative. Therefore, charge on an electron is written as minus E, and that on a proton is written as plus E. The fact that electric charge is always an integral multiple is termed as quantization of charge. There are large number of situations in physics where certain physical quantities are quantized. The quantization of charge was first suggested by the experimental laws of electrolysis discovered by English experimentalist Faraday. It was experimentally demonstrated by Millikan in 1912. In the International System of SI units, a unit of charge is called coulomb and it is denoted by the symbol C. A coulomb is defined in terms of unit of electric current, which you are going to learn in a subsequent chapter. In terms of definition, 1 coulomb is charge flowing through a wire in 1 second. If the current is 1 ampere, In this system, the value of basic unit of charge is E equals to 1.602192 into 10 to the power minus 19 coulomb. Thus, there are about 6 into 10 to the power 18 electrons in a charge of minus 1 coulomb. In electrostatics, charges of this large magnitude are seldom encountered, and hence we use smaller units. 1 microcoulomb equals to 10 to the power minus 6 coulomb, or 1 millicoulomb, that is equals to 10 to the power minus 3 coulomb. If the protons and electrons are the only basic charges in the universe, all the observable charges have to be integral multiples of E. Thus, if a body contains n1 electrons and n2 protons, that amount of charge on the body is n2 into positive E plus n1 into negative E. That is equals to n2 minus n1 into E. Since n1 and n2 are integers, their difference is also an integer. Thus, the charge on any body is always an integral multiple of E and can be increased or decreased also in steps of E. The step size E, however, is very small because at the microscopic level we deal with charges of a few microcoulomb. At this scale, the fact that charge of a body can increase or decrease in units of E is not visible. In this respect, the grainy nature of the charge is lost and it appears to be continuous. This situation can be compared with the geometrical concepts of points and lines. A dotted line viewed from distance appears continuous to us, but it is not continuous in reality. As many points very close to each other normally give an impression of a continuous line, many small charges taken together appear as a continuous charge distribution. At the macroscopic level, one deals with charges that are enormous compared to magnitude of charge of E. Since E is equals to 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 coulomb, a charge of magnitude say 1 microcoulomb contains something like 10 to the power 13 times the electronic charge. At this scale, the fact that charge can increase or decrease only in units of E is not very different from saying that charge can take continuous values. Thus, at macroscopic level, the quantization of charge has no practical consequences and can be ignored. However, at microscopic level, where the charges involved are of order of a few tens or hundreds of E, they can be counted. They appear in discrete lumps, and quantization of charge cannot be ignored. It is the magnitude of scale involved that is very important. Coulomb's law. Coulomb's law is quantitative statement about the force between point charges. When the linear size of charged bodies are much smaller than the distance separating them, the size may be ignored and the charged bodies are treated as point charges. Coulomb measured the force between 2 point charges and found it varied inversely as the square of the distance between the charges and was directly proportional to the product of the magnitude of the two charges and acted along the line joining the two charges. Thus, if 2 point charges q1 q2 are separated by a distance r, in vacuum, the magnitude of force between them is given by F equals to K into mod of Q1 into Q2 upon R square. How did Coulomb arrive at this law from his experiments? Coulomb used a torsion balance for measuring the force between the two charged metallic spheres. When the separation between two spheres is much larger than the radius of each sphere charges may be regarded as point charges. However, the charges on the spheres were unknown to begin with. How then he discovered a relation like equation 1.1? Coulomb thought of a following simple way. Suppose the charge on a magnetic sphere is Q. If the sphere is put in contact with an identical uncharged sphere, the charge will spread over the two spheres. By symmetry, the charge on each sphere will be Q by 2. Repeating the process, we can get charges like Q by 2, Q by 4, Coulomb varied the distance for a fixed pair of charges and measured the force for different separations. He then varied the charges in pairs, keeping the distance fixed. Comparing forces for different pairs of charges and different distances, Coulomb arrived at equation 1.1. Coulomb's law, a simple mathematical statement, was initially experimentally arrived at in manner described above. While the original experiments established at microscopic level, it has also been established down to subatomic level. Coulomb discovered his law without knowing the explicit magnitude of the charge. In fact, it is the other way around. Coulomb's law now can be employed to furnish a definition for a unit of charge in the relation 1.1. K is so far arbitrary. We can choose any positive value of K. The choice of K determines the size of unit of charge in SI units. The value of K is about 9 into 10 to the power 9 Newton meter square upon Coulomb square. The unit charge that results from this choice is called a Coulomb, which we defined earlier in the section. Putting this value of K in equation, we can say that for Q1 equals to Q2 equals to 1 Coulomb, radius equals to 1 meter, the force equals to 9 into 10 to the power 9 Newton. Thus, that is, 1 Coulomb is the charge that when placed at a distance of 1 meter from another charge of same magnitude in vacuum experiences an electrical force of repulsion of magnitude 9 into 10 to the power 9 magnitude 9 into 10 to the power 9 Newton. 1 Coulomb is evidently too big a unit to be used in practice in electrostatics. One uses smaller units like 1 millicoulomb or 1 microcoulomb. Thus, the constant K in equation 1.1 is usually put as K equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught for later convenience. So that the Coulomb's law is written as F equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught into Q1 into Q2 upon R square. Epsilon naught is called permittivity of free space. The value of permittivity of free space in SI units is 8.854 into 10 to the power minus 12 Coulomb square Newton inverse meter square inverse. Since force is a vector, it is better to write Coulomb's law in vector notation. Let the position vectors of Q1 and Q2 be R1 and R2 respectively. We denote force on Q1 due to Q2 by F12 and force on Q2 due to Q1 by F21. The 2-point charges Q1 Q2 have been numbered 1 and 2 for convenience, and the vector leading from 1 to 2 is denoted by R21. R21 is equals to R2 minus R1. In the same way, the vector leading from 2 to 1 is denoted by R12. R12 equals to R1 minus R2, that is equals to minus of R21. The magnitude of the vectors R21 and R12 is denoted by R21 and R12 respectively. The direction of a vector is specified by a unit vector along the vector. To denote the direction from 1 to 2 or from 2 to 1, we define the unit vectors R21 cap equals to R21 upon R21, R21 cap equals to R21 upon R21, R21 cap minus R12 cap. Coulomb's law between 2-point charges Q1 Q2 located at R1 and R2 respectively is then expressed as F21 equals to F1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 into Q2 upon R21 square in the direction of R21 cap. Some remarks on equation 1.3. Equation 1.3 is valid for any sign of Q1 and Q2 whether positive or negative, and if Q1 and Q2 are of same sign, either both positive or both negative, F21 is along R21 cap, which denotes repulsion, as it should be for like charges. If Q1 and Q2 are of opposite signs, F21 is along minus R21 cap, that is equals to R12 cap, which denotes attraction as expected for unlike charges. Thus, we do not have to write separate equations for the cases of like and unlike charges. Equation 1.3 can take care of both the cases correctly. The force F12 on charge Q1 due to charge Q2 is obtained from equation 1.3. By simplifying, say interchanging 1 and 2, F12 is equals to F equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 upon R12 square R12 cap, which is equals to negative of F21. Thus Coulomb's law agrees with the Newton's third law. Coulomb's law gives the force between two charges and Q2 in vacuum. If the charges are placed in matter or the intervening space has matter, the situation gets complicated due to presence of charge constituents of matter. We shall consider electrostatics in matter in the next chapter. Force between multiple charges. The mutual electric force between two charges is given by Coulomb's law. How to calculate the force on the charge where there are not one but several charges around? Consider a system of n stationary charges Q1, Q2, Q3 to Qn in vacuum. What is the net force on Q1 due to Q2, Q3, Qn? Coulomb's law is not enough to answer this question. Recall that forces of mechanical origin add origin to the parallelogram law of addition. Is the same true for forces for electrostatic origin? Experimentally, it is verified that force on any charge due to a number of other charges is the vector sum of all the forces on that charge due to the other charges taken at one time. The individual forces are unaffected due to the presence of other charges. This is termed as principle of superposition. To better understand the concept, consider a system of three charges Q1, Q2 and Q3 as shown. The force on one charge, say Q1 due to two other charges Q2, Q3 can therefore be obtained by obtaining a vector addition of the forces due to each one of these charges. Thus, if the equation Q1 due to Q2 is denoted by F12, F12 is given by equation 1.3 even though other charges are present. Thus F12 equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 into Q2 upon R12 square. In the same way, the force Q1 due to Q3 denoted by F13 is given by F13 is equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 into Q3 upon R13 cap, which again is the Coulomb force on Q1 due to Q3 even though other charge Q2 is present. Thus, the total force on Q1 and Q due to charges Q2 and Q3 are given as F1 equals to F12 plus F13 equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 into Q2 by R12 square R12 cap 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught into Q1 into Q3 upon R13 square R13 cap. The above calculation of force can be generalized to a system more than 3. The principle of superposition says that in a system of charges Q1, Q2 till Qn, the force on Q1 due to Q2 is same as given by Coulomb's law. That is, it is unaffected by the presence of other charges Q3, Q4 and Qn. Thus, the total force F1 on the charge Q1 due to all other charges is then given by the vector sum of F12, F13 and so on till F1n. We can write it as Q1 upon 4 pi epsilon naught summation of I equals to 2 to n Qi upon R1i square into R1i cap. The vector sum is obtained as usual by the parallelogram law of addition vectors. All of electrostatics is basically a consequence of Coulomb's law and superposition principle. Electric field. Let us consider point charge Q placed in vacuum at the origin O. If we place another point charge Q at a point P where OP equals to R, then the charge Q will exert some force on Q as per Coulomb's law. We may ask the question, if the charge Q is removed, then what is left in the surrounding? Is there nothing? Is there nothing at point P? Then how does a force act when we place a charge Q at P? In order to answer such questions, the early scientists introduced the concept of field. According to this, we can say that Q produces an electric field everywhere in the surrounding. When another charge Q is brought at some point P, The field there acts on it and produces a force. The electric field produced by charge q at a point r is given as E of r is equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q by r square into r cap, where r cap is equals to r vector upon r is a unit vector from the origin to the point r. Thus equation 1.6 specifies the value of electric field for each value of the position vector r. The word field signifies how some distributed quantity, which could be scalar or a vector, varies with position. The effect of charge has been incorporated in the existence of the electric field. We obtain the force F exerted by a charge q on a charge small q as F equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught small q into capital Q upon r square into r cap. Note that charge q also exerts an equal and opposite force on the charge q. The electrostatic force between the charges capital Q and small q can be looked upon as an interaction between charge small q and the electric field of q, and vice versa. If we denote the position of charge q by vector r, it experiences a force F equal to charge q multiplied by electric field E at the equilibrium location of q. F of r equals to q into E of r. It defines the SI unit of electric field as Newton per Coulomb. From equation we can infer that if q is unity, electric field due to charge capital Q is numerically equal to the force exerted by it. Thus the electric field due to a charge point q at a point in space may be defined as the force that a unit positive charge would experience if placed at that point. The charge capital Q, which is producing the electric field, is called a source charge, and the charge q small q, which tests the effect of source charge, is called a test charge. Note that the source charge q must remain in its location. However, if a charge q is brought at any point around q, q itself is bound to experience an electrical force due to small q and will tend to move. A way out of this difficulty is to make q negligibly small. The force F is then negligibly small, but the ratio F by q is finite and defines the electric field. E equals to limit of q tends to 0 of F upon q. A practical way to get around the problem of keeping capital Q undisturbed in the presence of q is to hold q to its location by unspecified forces. This may look strange, but actually this is what happens in practice. When we are considering the electric force on a test charge small q due to a charged linear sheet, the charges on the sheet are held to their locations by the forces due to unspecified charged constituents inside the sheet. Note that the electric field E due to Q, though defined operationally in terms of some test charge Q, is independent of small q. This is because F is proportional to small q. The ratio F by q does not depend on small q. The location of charge q, which may take any value in the space around the charge capital Q. Thus, the electric field E due to Q is also dependent on the coordinate r. For different positions of the charge q all over the space, we get different values of electric field E. The field exists at every point in three-dimensional space. For a positive charge, the electric field will be directly radiated outwards the charge. On the other hand, if the source charge is negative, then electric field vector at each point points radially inwards. Since the magnitude of force F on charge small q due to capital Q depends only on the distance r of the charge small q from the charge capital Q, the magnitude of the electric field E will also depend only on distance r. Thus, At equal distances from charge capital Q, the magnitude of its electric field E is same. The magnitude of electric field E due to a point charge is thus same on a sphere with point charge at its center. In other words, it has spherical symmetry. Electric field due to system of charges. Consider a system of charges q1, q2 till qn with position vectors r1, r2 and rn relative to some origin O. Like the electric field at a point in space due to single charge, electric field at a point in space due to the system of charges is defined to be the force experienced by a unit test charge placed at that point. Without disturbing the original positions of charges q1, q2 and qn, we can use Coulomb's law and superposition principle to determine this field at point P denoted by position vector r. Electric field E1 at r due to q1 at r1 is given by E1 equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 upon r1p square r1p cap, where r1p is a unit vector in the direction of q1 to p and r1p is the distance between q1 and p. In the same manner, electric field E2 at r due to q2 at r2 is E2 equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q2 upon r2 square into r2p cap, where r2p cap is a unit vector in the direction of q2 to p and r2p is the distance between q2 and p. Similar expressions hold good for fields E3, E4, En due to charges q3, q4, qn. By the superposition principle, the electric field E at r due to system of charges is Er equals to E1 of r plus E2 of r plus and so on till En of r, which can be written as E of r equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught summation from I equals to 1 to n qi upon rip square in the direction of rip cap. E is a vector quantity that varies from one point to another point in space and is determined by the position of the source charges. Physical significance of electric field. You may wonder why the notion of electric field has been introduced here at all. After all, any force system of charges, the measurable quantity is the force on charge, which can be directly determined using Coulomb's law and the superposition principle. Why then introduce the intermediate quantity called the electric field? For electrostatics, the concept of electric field is convenient but not really necessary. Electric field is an elegant way of characterizing the electrical environment of a system of charges. Electric field at a point in the space around a system of charges tells you the force of a unit positive test charge would experience if placed at that point without disturbing the system. Electric field is a characteristic of the system of charges and is independent of the test charge that you place at a point to determine the field. The term field in physics generally refers to a quantity that is defined at every point in space and may vary from point to point. Electric field is a vector field. Since force is a vector quantity, the true physical significance of the concept of electric field, however, emerges only when we go beyond electrostatics and deal with time-dependent electromagnetic phenomena. Suppose we consider the force between two distant charges q1, q2 in accelerated motion. Now the greatest speed with which a signal or information can go from one point to another is the speed of light. Thus the effect of any motion of q1 and q2 cannot arise instantaneously. There will be some time delay between the effect force on q2 and cause motion of q1. It is precisely here that the notion of electric field, strictly electromagnetic field, is natural and very useful. The field picture is this. The accelerated motion of charge q1 produces electromagnetic waves which then propagate with the speed of c, reach q2 and cause a force on q2. The notion of field elegantly accounts for the time delay. Thus, even though electric and magnetic fields can be detected only by their effects on charges, they are regarded as physical entities. not merely mathematical constructs. They have an independent dynamics of their own, that is, they evolve according to laws of their own. They can also transport energy, thus, a source of time dependent electromagnetic fields turned on for a short interval of time and then switched off leaves behind propagating electromagnetic fields transporting energy. The concept of field was first introduced by Faraday and is now among the central concepts in physics. Electric field lines. We have studied electric field in the last section. It is a vector quantity and can be represented as we represent vectors. Let us try to represent E due to a point charge pictorially. Let the point charge be placed at the origin. Draw vectors pointing in all directions along the direction of electric field and their lengths proportional to the strength of the field at each point. Since the magnitude of electric field at a point decreases inversely as the square of the distance of that point from charge, the vector gets shorter as one goes away from the origin, always pointing radially outward. In this figure, each arrow indicates the electric field. The force acting on a unit positive charge placed at tail of the arrow connect the arrows pointing in one direction and resulting figure represent a field line. We thus get many field lines pointing outwards from the point charge. Have we lost the information about the strength or magnitude of the field now? Because if it was contained in the length of the arrow, no. Now the magnitude of the field is represented by the density of field lines. E is strong near the charge, so the density of field lines is more near the charge and the lines are closer away from the charge. The field gets weaker and the density of field lines is less, resulting in well separated lines. Another person may draw more lines, but number of lines is not important. In fact, an infinite number of lines can be drawn in any region. It is relative density of lines in different regions which is important. We draw the figure of the plane of paper in 2D, but we live in 3D. So if one wishes to estimate the density of field lines, one has to consider the number of lines per unit cross-sectional area perpendicular to the lines. Since the electric field decreases as the square of the distance from a point charge and the area enclosing the charge increases as the square of the distance, the number of field lines crossing the enclosing area remains constant, whatever may be the distance, the area from the charge. We started by saying that field lines carrying information about the direction of the electric field at different points in space. Having drawn a certain set of field lines, the relative density of the field lines at different points indicates the relative strength of electric field at those points. The field lines crowd where the field is strong and are spaced apart where it is weak. Figure shows a set of field lines. We can imagine two equal and small elements of area placed at points R and S normal to the field lines there. The number of field lines in our picture cutting the area elements is proportional to the magnitude of field at these points. The picture shows that the field R is stronger than at S. To understand the dependence of the field lines on the area, or rather the solid angle, subtended by an area element, let us try to relate the area with solid angle, a generalization of angle to 3 dimensions. However, how a plane angle is defined in 2 dimensions, let a small transverse line element delta L be placed at a distance r from point O, then likewise the angle subtended by delta L at O can be approximated as delta theta equals to delta L by R. Likewise, in 3 dimensions, the solid angle subtended by a small perpendicular plane area delta S at a distance R can be written as delta O equals to delta S by R square. We know that in a given solid angle, the number of radial field lines is same. For 2 points P1 and P2 at distance under R1 and R2 from the charge, the element of area subtending the solid angle delta ohm is R1 square delta ohm. At P1, an element of area R2 square delta ohm at P2 respectively. The number of lines, say n, cutting these area elements are the same. The number of field lines cutting unit area element is therefore n by R1 square delta ohm at P1 and n by R2 square delta ohm at P2. Since n and delta ohm are common, the strength of field clearly has a 1 by R square dependence. The picture of field lines was invented by Faraday to develop the intuitive non-mathematical way of visualizing electric fields around charge configurations. Faraday called them lines of force. This term is somewhat misleading, especially in case of magnetic fields. The more appropriate term in field lines, electric or magnetic, that we have adopted in this book. Electric field lines are thus a way of pictorially mapping the electric field around a configuration of charges. An electric field line is, in general, a curve drawn in such a way that the tangent to the point to it at each point is in the direction of the net field at that point. An arrow on the curve is obviously necessary to specify the direction of electric field from the two possible directions indicated by tangent to a curve. A field line is a space curve that is curved in 3 dimensions. Figure shows the field lines around some simple charge configurations. As mentioned earlier, the field lines in 3-dimensional space, though the figure shows them only in a plane, the field lines of a single positive charge are radially outward, while those of a single negatively charged are radially inward. The field lines around a system of 2 positive charges give a vivid pictorial description of mutual repulsion, while those around the configuration of 2 equal and opposite charges, a dipole, show clearly the mutual attraction between the charges. The field lines follow some important general properties. Field lines start from positive charge and at negative charges. If there is a single charge, they may start or end at infinity. In a charge-free region, electric field lines can be taken to be continuous curve without any breaks. Two field lines can never cross each other. If they did, the field at point of intersection will not have a unique direction, which is absurd. Electrostatic field lines do not form any closed loops. This follows the conservative nature of electric field. Electric flux. Consider flow of a liquid with velocity v through a small flat surface ds in a direction normal to the surface. The rate of flow of liquid is given by the volume crossing the area per unit time VDS, and they represent the flux of liquid flowing across the plane. If the normal to the surface is not parallel to the direction of flow of liquid, that is to V, but makes an angle theta with it, the projected area in a plane perpendicular to V is del ds cos theta. Therefore, the flux going out on surface ds is V into n cap ds. For the case of electric field, we define an analogous quantity and call it electric flux. We should, however, note that there is no flow of physically observable quantity, unlike the case of liquid flow. In the picture of electric field described above, we saw that number of field lines crossing per unit area placed normal to the field at a point is measure of the strength of electric field at that point. This means that if we place a small planar element of an area delta S normal to E at point, the number of field lines crossing it is proportional to E delta S. Now suppose we tilt the area element by angle theta, clearly the number of field lines crossing the area element will be smaller. The projection, thus the area normal to E is delta S cos theta. Thus, the number of field lines crossing delta S is proportional to delta S cos theta. When theta equals to 90, field lines will be parallel to delta S and will not cross it at all. Certain orientation of area element and not merely its magnitude is important in many contexts. For example, in a stream, the amount of water flowing through a ring will naturally depend on how you hold the ring. If you hold the ring normal to the flow, maximum water will flow through it, and if you hold it with some other orientation, this shows that area element should be treated as vector. It has a magnitude and also a direction. How to specify direction of planar area? Clearly, the normal to the plane specifies the orientation of the plane. Thus, the direction of a planar area vector is along its normal. How to associate a vector to the area of a curved surface? We imagine dividing the surface into large number of very small area elements. Each small area element may be treated as planar and a vector associated with it as explained before. Notice one ambiguity here. The direction of an area element is along its normal, but a normal can point in two directions. Which direction do we choose as the direction of vector associated with the area element? This problem is resolved by some convention appropriate to the given context. For the case of closed surface, the convention is very simple. The vector associated with every area of a closed surface is taken to be in the direction of the outward normal. This is convention used in figure 1.19. Thus, the area element vector delta S at a point on a closed surface equals delta S n cap, where delta S is the magnitude of the area element and area element and then n cap is a unit vector in the direction of outward normal at that point. We now come to the definition of electric flux. Electric flux del phi through an area element del S is defined as del phi equals to E dot delta S, E equals to delta S cos theta, which as seen before is proportional to the number of fields cutting the area element. The angle theta here is the angle between E and delta S. For a closed surface, with the convention stated already, theta is angle between E and the outward normal to the area element. Notice we could look at the expression E delta S cos theta in two ways. Delta S E into delta S cos theta, that is E times the projection of area normal to E, or E delta S, that is component of E along the normal to the area element times the magnitude of the area element. The unit of electric flux is Newton Coulomb inverse meter square. The basic definition of electric flux is given by equation 1.11 can be used in principle to calculate the total flux through any given surface. All we have to do is to divide the surface into small area elements, calculate the flux on each element and then add them up. Thus, the total flux through surface S is phi approximately equals to summation of E dot delta S. The approximation sign is put here because the electric field E is taken to be constant over the small area element. This is mathematically exact only when you take delta S tends to 0, as the sum in equation 1.12 is written as an integral. Electric dipole. An electric dipole is a pair of equal and opposite point charges q and minus q separated by a distance 2a. The line connecting the two charges defines a direction in space. By convention, the direction from minus q to q is said to be the direction of dipole. The midpoints of location of minus q and q is called the center of the dipole. The total charge of electric dipole is obviously 0. This does not mean that the field of electric dipole is 0. Since the charge q and minus q are separated by some distance, the electric field due to them when added do not exactly cancel out. However, if distance is much larger than the separation of two charges forming a dipole, the fields due to q and minus q nearly cancel out. The electric field due to a dipole therefore falls off at large distance faster than 1 by r square. These qualitative ideas are borne out by explicit calculation as follows. The electric field of an electric dipole. The electric field of the pair of charges minus q and q at any point in space can be found out from Coulomb's law and the superposition principle. The results are simple for the following two cases: when the point is on the dipole axis and when it is equatorial plane of the dipole, that is, on a plane perpendicular to the pole axis of dipole through its center. The electric field at any general point P is obtained by adding the electric fields E minus Q due to the charge minus Q at E plus Q due to charge Q by the parallelogram law of vectors. For the points on the axis, let the point P be at distance r from the center of the dipole on the side of the charge Q shown in figure. Then E minus Q is equals to Q by minus of 4 pi epsilon naught r plus a whole square P, where P cap is the unit vector along the dipole axis from minus Q to Q. Also, E plus Q is equals to Q by 4 pi epsilon naught r minus a square P. Total field P at P is equals to E plus Q plus E minus Q equals to Q upon 4 pi epsilon naught into 1 upon r minus a whole square minus 1 upon r plus a whole square into P equals to Q upon 4 pi epsilon naught 4ar upon r square minus a square whole square into P. For r is very greater than a, E is equals to 4qa upon 4 pi epsilon naught r cube. For points on the equatorial plane, the magnitudes of the electric fields due to two charges plus q and minus q are given by E plus q equals to q by 4 pi epsilon naught into 1 by r square plus a square. E of minus q is equals to q by 4 pi epsilon naught 1 by r square plus a square and are equal. The directions of E plus q and E minus q are shown in the figure. Clearly, the components normal to dipole axis cancel away. The components along the dipole axis add up. The total electric field is opposite to P cap. We have E is equals to minus of E plus q plus E minus q cos theta P cap, that is equals to minus 2qa upon 4 pi epsilon naught r square plus a square to the power 3 by 2 into P. At large distances, r is very greater than a, E is equals to 2qa upon minus 4 pi epsilon naught r cube. It is clear that dipole field at large distances does not involve q and a separately. It depends on the product of q and a. This suggests the definition of dipole moment. The dipole moment vector p of an electric dipole is defined by p is equals to q into 2a p cap. That is, it is a vector whose magnitude is charge q times the separation of 2a between the pair of charges q and minus q, and the direction is along the line from minus q to q. In terms of P, the electric field of a dipole at large distances takes simple forms. At a point on the dipole axis, E is equals to 2p upon 4 pi epsilon naught r cube. At a point on an equatorial plane, E is equals to minus p upon 4 pi epsilon naught r cube. Notice the important point that the dipole field at large distances falls off not as 1 by r square but as 1 by r cube. Further, the magnitude and the direction of the dipole field depends not only on the distance r but also on the angle between the position vector r and the dipole moment p. We can think of the limit when dipole size 2a approaches 0, the charge q approaches infinity in such a way that the product p equals to q into 2a is finite. Such a dipole is referred to as point dipole. For a point dipole, equation are exact true for any r. Physical significance of dipoles. In most molecules, the center of positive charges and of negative charges lie at the same place. Therefore, their dipole moment is zero. CO2 and CH4 are of these type of molecules. However, they develop a dipole moment when an electric field is applied, but in some molecules, the centers of negative charges and of positive charges do not coincide. Therefore, they have a permanent electric dipole moment. Even in the absence of an electric field, such molecules are called polar molecules. Water molecules H2O is an example of this type. Various materials give rise to interesting properties and important applications in the presence or absence of electric field. Dipole in an uniform external field. Consider a permanent dipole of dipole moment P in a uniform external field E as shown. By permanent dipole we mean that P exists irrespective of E. It has not been induced by E. There is a force QE on Q and minus QE on minus Q. The net force on the dipole is 0. Hence, E is uniform. However, the charges are separated, so the forces act on different points, resulting in torque on the dipole. The net force is 0. The torque is independent of the origin. Its magnitude equals the magnitude of each force multiplied by the arm of the couple, that is perpendicular distance between the two anti-parallel forces. Magnitude of torque is equals to QE into 2a sin theta. In its direction is normal to the plane of the paper coming out of it. The magnitude of P into E is also PE sin theta, and its direction is normal to the paper coming out of it. Thus, torque is equals to vector P into vector E. This torque will tend to align the dipole with the field E. When P is aligned with E, the torque is 0. What happens if the field is not uniform? In that case, the net force will evidently be non-zero. In addition, there will in general be a torque on the system as before. The general case is involved, so let us consider the simpler situations when P is parallel to E or anti-parallel to E. In either case, the net torque is 0, but there is a net force on the dipole if E is not uniform. It is easily seen that when P is parallel to E, the dipole has a net force in the direction of increasing field. When P is anti-parallel to E, the net force on the dipole is in the direction of decreasing field. In general, the force depends on the orientation of P with respect to E. This brings us to a common observation in frictional electricity. A comb run through dry hairs attract pieces of paper. The comb, as we know, acquires charge through friction, but the paper is not charged. What then explains the attractive force? Taking the clue from the preceding discussion, the charged comb polarizes the piece of paper, that is, induces a net dipole moment in the direction of field. Further, the electric field due to a comb is not uniform. This non-uniformity of the field makes a dipole to experience a net force on it. In this situation, it is easily seen that the paper should move in the direction of the comb. Spontaneous charge distribution. We have so far dealt with charge configurations involving discrete charges. One reason why we restricted to discrete charges is that the mathematical treatment is simpler and does not involve calculus. For many purposes, however, it is impractical to work in terms of discrete charges and we need to work with continuous charge distributions. For example, on a surface of a charged conductor, it is impractical to specify the charge distribution in terms of the locations of the microscopic charge constituents. It is more feasible to consider an area element del S on the surface of the conductor, which is very small on the macroscopic scale but big enough to include a very large number of electrons, and specify the charge delta Q on that element, and then define a surface change density. We then define a surface charge density sigma at the area element by sigma equals to delta Q upon delta S. We can do this at different points on a conductor and thus arrive at a continuous function sigma called the surface charge density. The surface charge density sigma, so defined, ignores the quantization of charge and the discontinuity in charge distribution at the microscopic level. Sigma represents macroscopic surface charge density, which is in a sense is a smoothed out average of the microscopic charge density over an area element del S, which as said before is large microscopically but small macroscopically. The units for sigma are coulomb per meter square. Similar consideration apply for a line charge distribution and a volume charge distribution. The linear charge density lambda of a wire is defined as lambda equals to delta Q by delta L, where delta is small line element of wire on the macroscopic scale that however includes a large number of microscopic charge constituents, and delta Q is the charge contained in that line element. The units for lambda are coulomb per meter. The volume change density is defined in similar manner. Rho is equals to delta Q by delta V, where delta Q is the charge included in the macroscopically small volume element delta V that includes a large number of microscopic charge constituents. The units for rho are coulomb per meter cube. The notion of continuous charge distribution is similar to that we adopt for continuous mass distribution in mechanics. When we refer to the density of liquid, we are referring to its macroscopic density. We regard it as a continuous fluid and ignore its discrete molecular constitution. This field, due to continuous charge distribution, can be obtained in much the same way for a system of discrete charges. Suppose a continuous charge distribution in space has a charge density ρ. Choose any convenient origin O and let the position vector of any point in the charge distribution be r, and the charge density ρ may vary from point to point, that is, it is a function of r. Divide the charge distribution into small elements of volume of size delta V. The charge in volume element delta V is ρ delta V. Now consider any general point P with position vector r. Electric field due to charge ρ delta V is given by Coulomb's law. Delta E is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught ρ delta V by r dash square, where r dash is the distance between element and P and r dash cap is the unit vector in the direction from the charge element to P. By the superposition principle, the total electric field due to charge distribution is obtained by summing over electric fields due to different various volume elements. E is approximately equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught summation of all delta V rho delta V by r dash square r dash cap. Note that r dash cap all vary from point to point. In a strict mathematical method, we should let delta V tends to 0 and sum then becomes an integral, but we omit that discussion here for simplicity. In short, using Coulomb's law and the superposition principle, electric field can be determined for any charge distribution, discrete or continuous, or part discrete or part continuous. Gauss's law. As a simple application of notion of electric flux, let us consider the total flux through a sphere of radius r, which encloses a point charge q at its center. Divide the sphere into small area elements as shown. The flux through an area element delta S is delta phi is equal to E delta S equals to Q by 4 pi epsilon naught R square R dash cap into delta S. Now we have to use Coulomb's law for electric field due to a single charge Q. The unit vector is along the radius from the center to the area element. Now since the normal to a sphere at every point is along the radius vector at that point, the area element delta S and R cap have the same direction. Therefore, delta phi is equals to Q by 4 pi epsilon naught R square delta S, since the magnitude of unit vector is 1. The total flux through the sphere is obtained by adding a flux through all different area elements. Phi is equals to summation of all delta S Q by 4 pi epsilon naught R square delta S. Each element, since is of the sphere, is at the same distance r from the charge. Phi is equals to Q by 4 pi epsilon naught R square summation of delta S. Delta S equals to Q by 4 pi epsilon naught R square S. Now S, the total area of sphere, equals 4 pi R square. Thus, phi is equals to Q by epsilon naught. It is a simple illustration of a general result of electrostatics called Gauss's law. We state Gauss's law without proof. Electric flux through a closed surface is equals to Q by epsilon naught. Q is equals to total charge enclosed by S. The law implies that the total electric flux through a closed surface is zero if no charge is enclosed by the surface. We can see this explicitly in the simple situation of figure 1.26. Here the electric field is uniform and we are considering a closed cylindrical surface with its axis parallel to the uniform field E. The total flux phi through the surface is equals to phi is equals to phi 1 plus phi 2 plus phi 3, where phi 1 and phi 2 represent the flux through the surfaces 1 and 2 of the cylinder, and phi 3 is the flux through the curved surface cylindrical part of the closed surface. Now the normal to the surface 3 at every point is perpendicular to E, so by definition of flux phi 3 is 0. Further, the opposite normal to 2 is along E, while the outward normal to 1 is opposite to E. Therefore, phi 1 is equals to minus ES1, phi 2 equals to plus E2, S1 is equals to S2 is equals to S, where S is the area of circular cross section. Thus the flux is 0 as expected by Gauss's law. Thus, whenever you find the net electric flux through a closed surface is 0, we conclude that total charge contained in the closed surface is 0. The significance of Gauss' law is that it is true in general and not only for the simple cases we have considered. Let us note some important points regarding this law. Gauss's law is true for any closed surface, no matter what its shape or size. The term Q on the right side of Gauss's law include the sum of all charges enclosed by the surface. The charges may be located anywhere inside the surface. In the situation when the surface is so chosen that there are some charges inside and some outside, the electric field on the left side of equation is due to all the charges both inside and outside S. The term Q on the right side of Gauss's law, however, represents the total charge inside S. The surface that we choose for the application of Gauss's law is called the Gaussian surface. You may choose any Gaussian surface and apply Gauss's law. However, take care not to let the Gaussian surface pass through any discrete charge. This is because electric field due to a system of discrete charges is not well defined at the location of any charge. However, the Gaussian surface can pass through a continuous charge distribution. Gauss's law is often useful towards much easier calculation of the electrostatic field when the system has Gauss symmetry. This is facilitated by the choice of suitable Gaussian surface. Finally, Gauss's law is based on the inverse square dependence on distance contained in the Coulomb's law. Any violation of Gauss's law will indicate departure from the inverse square law. Applications of Gauss's law. the electric field due to a general charge distribution is as seen above. In practice, except for some special cases, the summation or integration involved in the equation cannot be carried out to give electric field at every point in space. For some symmetric charge configurations, however, it is possible to obtain the electric field in a simple way using the Gauss's law. This is the best understood by some examples. Field due to infinitely long straight uniformly charged wire. Consider a uniformly long thin straight wire with uniform linear charge density lambda. The wire is obviously an axis of symmetry. Suppose we take a radial vector from O to P and rotate it around the wire. The points P, P dash, P double dash to obtain are completely equivalent with respect to the charge wire. This implies that the electric field must have the same magnitude at these points. The direction of electric field at every point must be radial outward if lambda is greater than 0 and inward if lambda is less than 0. Consider a pair of linear elements P1 and P2 of the wire as shown. The electric field produced by the two elements of the pair when summed give a resultant electric field which is radial. This is true for any such pair and hence the total field at any point P is radial. Finally, since the wire is infinite, electric field does not depend on the position of P along the length of wire. In short, the electric field is everywhere radial in the plane cutting the wire normally, and its magnitude depends only on the radial distance r. To calculate the field, imagine a cylindrical Gaussian surface. Since the field is everywhere radial, flux through the two ends of the cylindrical Gaussian surface is 0. At the cylindrical part of surface, E is normal to the surface at every point and its magnitude is constant. Since it depends only on r, the surface area of curved path is 2 pi r L, where L is the length of the cylinder. Flux through the Gaussian surface is equals to E into 2 pi r L. The surface includes charge equal to lambda L. Gauss's law then gives E into 2 pi r L equals to lambda L by epsilon naught. E is equals to lambda upon 2 pi epsilon naught r. Vectorially, E at any point is given by E is equals to lambda upon 2 pi epsilon naught into r into n cap, where n cap is the radial unit vector in the plane normal to the wire passing through the point. E is directed outwards if lambda is positive and inward if lambda is negative. Note that when we write a vector A as a scalar multiplied by a unit vector as A equals to A into A cap, the scalar A is an algebraic number. It can be negative or positive. The direction of A will be same as that of the unit vector. When we want to restrict to non-negative values, we use symbol mod of A and call it modulus of A. Thus, mod of A is greater than equals to 0. Also note that though only the charge enclosed by the surface was included above, the electric field E is due to the charge on the entire wire. Further, the assumption that wire is infinitely long is crucial. Without this assumption, we cannot take E to be normal to the curved part of cylindrical Gaussian surface. However, it is approximately true for electric field around the central portions of a long wire where the end effects may be ignored. Field due to uniformly charged infinite plane sheet. Let sigma be the uniform surface charge density of an infinite plane sheet. We take x-axis normal to the given plane. By symmetry, the electric field will not depend on y and z coordinates, and its direction at every point must be taken parallel to x direction. We can take the Gaussian surface to be rectangular parallel piped of cross-sectional area A. As shown, as seen from the figure, only the two faces 1 and 2 will contribute to the flux Electric field lines are parallel to the other faces and they therefore do not contribute to the total flux. The unit vector normal to the surface 1 is in minus x direction, while the unit vector normal to the surface 2 is in positive x direction. Therefore, flux delta E delta S through both the surfaces are equal and add up. Therefore, the net flux through the Gaussian surface is 2EA. The charge enclosed by the closed surface is sigma A. Therefore, by Gauss's law, 2EA is equals to sigma A by epsilon naught, or E equals to sigma by 2 epsilon naught. Vectorially, E is equals to sigma upon 2 epsilon naught n cap, where n cap is the unit vector normal to the plane and going away from it. E is directed away from the plate if sigma is positive and towards the plate if sigma is negative. Note that the above application of Gauss's law has brought out an additional fact: E is independent of x also. For a finite larger plane sheet, equation is approximately true in the middle regions of the planar sheet away from the ends. Field due to a uniformly charged thin spherical shell. Let sigma be the uniform surface charge density of a thin spherical shell of radius r. The situation has obvious spherical symmetry. The field at any point P, outside or inside, can depend only on r and must be radial. Field outside the shell. Consider a point P outside the shell with radius vector r. To calculate E at P, we take the Gaussian surface to be sphere of radius r and with center O passing through P. All points on this sphere are equivalent relative to given charge configuration. The electric field at each point of the Gaussian surface therefore has same magnitude E and is along the radius vector of each point. Thus E and delta S at every point are parallel and the flux through each element is E delta S. Summing over all delta S, the flux through the Gaussian surface is E into 4 pi r square. The charge enclosed is sigma into 4 pi r square by Gauss's law. E into 4 pi r square equals to sigma 4 pi r square upon epsilon naught, or E is equals to Q upon 4 pi epsilon naught r square, where Q is equals to 4 pi r square sigma is the total charge on the spherical shell. The electric field is directed outward if Q is greater than 0 and inward if Q is less than 0. This, however, is exactly the field produced by a charge Q placed at center O. Thus, for points outside the shell, the field due to a uniformly charged shell is as if the entire charge of shell is concentrated at its center. Field inside the shell. The point P is inside the shell. The Gaussian surface is again a sphere through P centered at O. The flux through the Gaussian surface calculated as before is E into 4 pi r square. However, in this case, the Gaussian surface encloses no charge. Gauss's law then gives E into 4 pi r square equals to 0, that is E equals to 0, that is field due to a uniformly charged thin shell is 0 at all points inside the shell. This important result is a direct consequence of Gauss's law which follows the Coulomb's law. The experimental verification of the result confirms the 1 by r square dependence in Coulomb's law. On symmetry operations, in physics, we often encounter systems with various symmetries. Consideration of these symmetries help us arrive at result much faster than otherwise by a straightforward calculation. Consider, for example, an infinite uniform sheet of charge along the yz plane. This system is unchanged if translated parallel to the yz plane in any direction, rotated about the x axis through any angle. As the system is unchanged under any symmetry operation, so must its properties be. In particular, in this example, the electric field E must be unchanged. Translation symmetry along the y-axis shows that electric field must be same at a point 0 y1 0 as at 0 y2 0. Similarly, translational symmetry along the z-axis shows that electric field at 2.00 z1 and 00z2 must be the same. By using rotation symmetry around x-axis, we can conclude that E must be perpendicular to the yz plane. It is must that it will be parallel to the x direction. Try to think of a symmetry now which will tell you the magnitude of electric field is a constant, independent of the x coordinate. It thus turns out that the magnitude of electric field due to a uniformly charged infinite conducting sheet is same at all points in space. The direction is, however, opposite of each other on either side of the sheet. Compare this with the effort needed to arrive at the result via direct calculation using Coulomb's law. Summary: Electric field Summary: Electric and magnetic forces determine the properties of atoms, molecules, and bulk matter. Second, from simple experiment of frictional electricity, one can infer that there are two types of charges in nature and that like charges repel and unlike charges attract. By convention, the charge on a glass rod rubbed with silk is positive, that on a plastic rod rubbed with fur is then negative. Third, conductor allows movement of electric charge through them, insulators do not. In metals, the mobile charges are electrons, electrolytes, both positive and negative ions are mobile. Electric charge has three basic properties: quantization, additivity, and conservation. Quantization of electric charge means total charge of a body is an always integral multiple of a basic quantum of charge, that is q equals to Ne. Proton and electron have charges plus E and minus E respectively. For macroscopic charges for which n is a very large number, quantization of charge can be ignored. Additivity of charges means that the total charge of a system is the algebraic sum of all individual charges in the system. Conservation of electric charges means that the total charge of an isolated system remains unchanged with time. This means that when isolated system remains unchanged with time, this means that when the bodies are charged through friction, there is the transfer of electric charge from one body to another, but no creation or destruction of charge. Coulomb's law. The mutual electrostatic force between 2-point charges Q1 and Q2 is proportional to the product of Q21 into Q2 and inversely proportional to the square of the distance R21 separating them. Mathematically, F21 equals to force on Q2 due to Q1, K Q1 Q2 upon R21 square, where K is equals to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught is equals to 8.854 into 10 to the power minus 12 Coulomb square Newton inverse meter square inverse. In SI units, the unit of charge is Coulomb. The experiment value of constant epsilon naught is given. The approximate value of K is 9 into 10 to the power 9 Newton meter square Coulomb square inverse. The ratio of electric and gravitational force between a proton and electron is Ke square upon G MeV equals to 2.4 into 10 to the power 39. 7. Superposition principle. The principle is based on the property that the forces with which two charges attract or repel each other are not affected by the presence of a third or more additional charges. For an assembly of charges, the force on any charge, say Q1, is the vector sum of the force on Q1 due to Q2, the force of Q1 due to Q3, and so on. For each pair, the force is given by Coulomb's law for two charges stated earlier. The electric field at a point due to charge configuration is the force on a small positive test charge Q placed at a point divided by the magnitude of the charge. Electric field due to a point charge Q has a magnitude mod Q divided by 4 pi epsilon naught r square. It is radially outwards from Q, and if Q is positive, and radially inwards if Q is negative. Like Coulomb force, electric field also satisfied superposition principle. An electric line is a curve drawn in such a way that the tangent at each point on the curve gives the direction of electric field at that point. The relative closeness of field lines indicates the relative strength of electric field at different points. They crowd near each other in regions of strong electric field and are far apart where the electric field is weak. In regions of constant electric field, the field lines are uniformly spaced parallel straight lines. Some of the important properties of field lines are continuous curves without any breaks. Two field lines cannot cross each other. Electrostatic field lines start at positive charges and end at negative charges. They cannot form closed loops. An electric dipole is a pair of equal and opposite charges q and minus q separated by distance q 2a. Its dipole moment vector p has magnitude 2qa and is in the direction of the dipole axis from minus q to q. Field of an electric dipole and its equatorial plane at a distance from r, the center E is equals to minus p upon 4 pi epsilon naught into 1 by a square plus r square to the power 3 by 2. For r is very greater than a, E is approximately equals to minus p upon 4 pi epsilon naught r cube. Dipole electric field on the axis at a distance r from center is approximately equals to 2p upon 4 pi epsilon naught r cube. For r is very greater than a, the 1 by r cube dependence of dipole electric field should be noted in contrast, and to the 1 by r square dependence of electric field due to point charge. In a uniform electric field, E, a dipole experience a torque T tau given by tau equals to P into E, but experience no net force. Thus, the flux delta phi of electric field E through a small area element delta S is given by delta phi equals to E into delta S. The vector element delta S is given by delta is equals to delta S n cap, where delta S is the magnitude of area element and n cap is the normal to the area element, which can be considered planar for sufficient small delta S. For an element of a closed surface, n cap is taken to the direction of outward normal by convention. Gauss's law. The flux of electric field through any closed surface S is 1 pi epsilon naught times the total charge enclosed by S. The law is especially useful for determining electric field E when the source distribution has simple symmetry. For thin, infinitely long straight wire of uniform linear charge densities lambda, E is equals to lambda by 2 pi epsilon naught r n cap, where r is the perpendicular distance of the point from the wire and n cap is the radial unit vector. Infinite thin plane sheet of uniform surface charge density sigma, E is equals to sigma upon 2 pi epsilon naught, where n cap is unit vector normal to the plane. Thin spherical shell or uniform surface charge density sigma, E is equals to q upon 4 pi epsilon naught r square. If r is smaller than capital R, E is equals to 0, where r is the distance of point from the center of the shell and capital R is the radius of the shell. Q is the total charge of the shell. Q equals to 4 pi r square sigma. The electric field outside the shell is same as though the total charge is concentrated at the center. The same result is true for a solid sphere of uniform volume charge density. The field is 0 at all points inside the shell. The various physical quantities and their dimensions with their units are given as vector area element symbol delta S, dimensions L square, unit meter square. Electric field is E, dimension is mlt minus 3a minus 1, unit is volt meter inverse. Electric flux phi is equals to dimension is ml cube t minus 3 a minus 1, voltmeter is the unit. Dipole moment p, dimension is lta, unit is coulomb meter. Linear charge density is L inverse Ta, surface charge density is linear square inverse Ta, volume charge density is L cube inverse Ta. Points to ponder. You might wonder why the protons, all carrying positive charges, are compacting residing inside the nucleus. Why do they not fly away? You will learn that there is a third kind of a fundamental force which holds them together. The range of distance where the force is effective is, however, very small. This is precisely the size of the nucleus. Also, the electrons are not allowed to sit on the top of the protons, that is inside the nucleus, due to laws of quantum mechanics. This gives the atoms their structure as they exist in nature. Coulomb force and gravitational force follow the same inverse square law, but gravitational force has only one sign, always attractive, while Coulomb force can be of both signs, attractive and repulsive, allowing possibility of cancellation of electric forces. This is how gravity, despite being a much weaker force, can be a dominating and a pervasive force in nature. The constant proportionality K in Coulomb's law is a matter of choice if the unit of charge is to be defined using Coulomb's law. In SI units, however, what is defined is the unit of current A by its magnetic effect Ampere's law, and the unit of charge Coulomb is simply defined by 1 Coulomb equals to 1 Ampere second. In this case, the value of K is no longer arbitrary. It is approximately 9 into 10 to the power 9 Newton meter square Coulomb square inverse. The rather large value of K, the large size of unit of charge from the point of view of electric effects arises because the unit charge is defined in terms of magnetic forces, which are generally much weaker than electric forces. Thus 1 ampere is a unit of reasonable size of magnetic effects. The additive property of charge is not an obvious property. It is related to the fact that electric charge has no direction associated with it. Charge is scalar. Charge is not only a scalar under rotation, it is invariant for frames or reference in relative motion. This is not always true for every scalar. For example, kinetic energy is a scalar under rotation but is not invariant for frames of reference in relative motion. Conservation of total charge of an isolated system is a property independent of the scalar nature of charge, noted in point 6. Conservation refers to invariance in time in a given frame of reference. A quantity may be scalar but not conserved. On the other hand, one can have conserved vector quantity. Quantization of electric charge is a basic unexplained law of nature. Uninterestingly, there is no analogous law of quantization of mass. Superposition principle should not be regarded as obvious or equated with the law of addition of vectors. It says two things. Force on one charge due to another charge is unaffected by the presence of other charges, and there are no additional 3 body, 4 body, etc. forces which arises when there are more than 2 charges. The electric field due to a discrete configuration is not defined at the locations of the discrete charges. For continuous volume charge distribution, it is defined at any point in the distribution. For a surface charge distribution, electric field is discontinuous across the surface.